what Buddha and Jesus both got right about forgiveness, and where they differ. You've been told to forgive. Every religion says it. Every therapist says it. But almost no one explains what actually happens inside you when you don't. And why the Buddha's answer to that question is unlike anything you've heard. Today, two of history's greatest teachers on forgiveness, Jesus and the Buddha, side by side. Not to decide who's right, but because each one saw something the other didn't. And together, they offer the most complete understanding of forgiveness I've ever encountered. Here's what makes this so interesting. Both of them said, release resentment. Both of them said, it will set you free. But they meant completely different things by free, and they had completely different reasons for saying it. One started with love, the other started with seeing clearly. And that difference, that one difference, changes everything about how forgiveness actually works inside you. We'll get to both. But first, the thing they share. The thing almost no one talks about. Asi 1, the shared ground. Let me ask you something honest. Is there someone in your life you haven't forgiven? Not a stranger, not some abstract concept, someone specific, someone whose name just appeared in your mind, right now, without you choosing it. Maybe it's a parent, maybe a former friend, a spouse, a sibling, someone who said something 20 years ago that still replays, word for word, in the middle of the night. You know you should forgive them. You've heard it 1,000 times. Let it go, move on, be the bigger person, forgive and forget. And maybe you've tried. Maybe you've told yourself it's over. Maybe you've said the words out loud, I forgive you, and meant it in that moment. And then 3 days later, you're lying awake at 2 a.m, and the memory is back. The words, the tone, the look on their face, and the anger is right there, as fresh as the day it happened. So here's the question no one answers. Why? Why is forgiveness so universally praised and so rarely achieved? Why does every tradition on earth say, forgive? And almost none of them explain why it's so hard, or what's actually happening inside you when you can't. Two teachers did. They lived 5 centuries apart, one in the Ganges plain of northern India, around the 5th century before Christ. The other in Roman-occupied Palestine, around the 1st century. They never met. They spoke different languages, came from different cultures, addressed different audiences. One founded a path with no God at the center. The other claimed to be the son of one. And yet, both of them made forgiveness central, not peripheral, not optional, central. Jesus built forgiveness into the most important prayer in Christianity, the Lord's Prayer. Every Sunday in every church for 2,000 years. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. Matthew 6:12. He didn't tuck it into a footnote. He made it a condition. You ask for forgiveness, and in the same breath, you commit to giving it. The Buddha, in one of his most striking teachings, listed 7 specific ways that anger destroys the person who holds it. N 7.60. Not the person who caused the anger, the person who carries it. He described it with the precision of a physician diagnosing a disease, because that's exactly what he was doing. Both of them looked at the same human tendency, the grip of resentment, the refusal to release. And both of them said, this will destroy you, let go. But here's where it gets fascinating. The word forgiveness doesn't map cleanly onto what the Buddha taught. In the Pali language of the early Buddhist texts, the closest word is Kama, and Kama also means the earth. A mind like the earth, you can pour things on it, burn things on it, bury things in it, and it remains. Not because it doesn't feel, because it isn't moved from its ground. That's a very different image from what most of us think of when we hear forgive. In the Greek of the New Testament, the word Jesus used, aphiemi, literally means to send away, to release, to dismiss. The same word was used on legal documents for the cancellation of debts. On the Rosetta Stone, aphemi meant total remission, as in the debt no longer exists. When Jesus said, forgive, he wasn't saying, feel better about it. He was saying, cancel the debt. Let it go as if it were never owed. 2 words, 2 languages, 2 images. One says, become like the earth, unshaken. The other says, send it away, released. And right there, in the etymology, you can already feel the difference in how these 2 traditions approach the same human problem. But before we go into that difference, and it's a profound one, I want you to notice what they share. Because it's more than you might think. Both of them said forgiveness is something that happens inside you, not between you and the other person. Jesus, on the cross, forgave people who hadn't asked for it, didn't understand what they'd done, and were actively killing him. Luke 23:34. He didn't wait for an apology. He didn't require acknowledgement. He forgave unilaterally. The Buddha's senior monk, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, puts it this way: forgiveness is a gift you can give us both, totally on your own, without my having to know or understand what you've done. You don't need the other person's participation. You don't need them to be sorry. You don't even need them to be alive. Both of them said forgiveness is not a single event. It's a practice, something you do again and again. C.S. Lewis, one of Christianity's sharpest modern voices, wrote that he would think he'd forgiven someone only to discover he'd merely suppressed the resentment. It kept coming back. His conclusion: forgiveness must be done over and over again, even for one offense. The Buddhist loving-kindness practice, metta, is described in the texts as something to be cultivated, whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down. SN 1.8. Not once, continuously, and both of them, and this matters enormously, both of them said that forgiveness does not mean pretending harm didn't happen. Lewis made a sharp distinction. Forgiveness and excusing are almost opposites. Forgiving means the wrong was real, was inexcusable, and you release it anyway. The Buddhist tradition never asks practitioners to deny that harm occurred. The Kakachupama Sutta, the famous teaching about the saw, MN 21, begins with an acknowledgement of real harm, real pain, real injustice, and then says, even so. So the shared ground is wider than most people realize. Forgiveness is internal. Forgiveness is practice. Forgiveness does not erase the truth. And yet, they arrived at this shared ground from entirely different starting points. Jesus began with love, and a particular kind of love. The love of a God who forgives first, forgives recklessly, forgives before you even ask. And from that experience of being forgiven, you find the capacity to forgive others. Grace flows downward and then outward. The Buddha began with seeing clearly. He looked at anger, not as a moral failing, but as a process with a cause, a mechanism, and a result. And when you see the mechanism clearly enough, when you see what resentment actually does to the one who holds it, Releasing it isn't an act of sainthood. It's an act of intelligence, love or wisdom, grace or clear seeing. Two doors into the same room. Let's open the first one. Act 2. Jesus on forgiveness. Most of you grew up with this. Whether you're Christian or not, if you grew up in the West, especially in America, the story of forgiveness you absorbed was shaped by Jesus. It was in the hymns, in the prayers, in the phrases your grandmother used. Forgive and forget. Turn the other cheek. Let go and let God. And because it was everywhere, it became wallpaper. You stopped seeing it. So let me take you back to the original, before it became a greeting card. Because what Jesus actually taught about forgiveness is far more radical, far more demanding, and far more beautiful than the version most people remember. Let's start with a story. A man has 2 sons. The younger one goes to his father and says, "Give me my share of the inheritance." Now, in the ancient Near East, this was not a financial request. It was a social act of violence. You don't ask for your inheritance while your father is alive, because your inheritance is what you receive when he dies. The son was saying, in effect, "You are dead to me. Give me what's mine so I can leave." And the father does. He divides his property. The younger son takes everything, travels to a distant country, and wastes it all. Every coin. And when famine hits, he finds himself feeding pigs, an animal so ritually unclean to a Jew that the image would have made Jesus' audience physically recoil. He's hungry enough to eat what the pigs are eating. Nobody gives him anything. And then, a moment of clarity. He remembers his father's hired servants. They eat well. They have shelter. He rehearses a speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." He walks home. And here is the moment that changes everything. His father sees him from far away, Luke 15:20, which means his father had been watching, waiting, looking down that road day after day for a son who might never return. And when he sees him, the text says, he felt compassion and ran. Now, in that culture, a patriarch did not run. Running meant lifting your robes, exposing your legs, a profound loss of dignity for the head of a household. Men of status walked, slowly, deliberately. Running was for children and servants. This father didn't care. He runs to his son, embraces him, kisses him. The son starts his rehearsed speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your..." The father interrupts. He never lets him finish. He never hears, "Treat me as a hired servant." Instead, he turns to his servants and says, "Bring the best robe, bring a ring, bring shoes, kill the fattened calf." The robe, restoration of honor. The ring, authority, family membership. The shoes, because slaves went barefoot, and this is not a slave. This is a son. The fattened calf, reserved for the most special occasion imaginable. The apology isn't finished. The party has already started. This is the parable of the Prodigal Son, Luke 15:11-32. And it is the fullest, most vivid image of forgiveness in the Christian tradition. Notice what Jesus is doing. He's not giving a command. He's not saying you should forgive. He's painting a picture. He's showing you what forgiveness looks like when it's operating at full power. And it looks like a father who abandons his dignity, who doesn't wait for the full apology, who restores everything before the debt has been settled. This is preemptive grace. forgiveness that arrives before it's been properly asked for. And there's a second character most people forget: the elder son, the one who stayed, who obeyed, who worked the fields. He hears the music, learns what happened, and refuses to enter the celebration. He's angry. He says to his father, "This son of yours has devoured your property with prostitutes, and you kill the fattened calf for him?" Notice the language. Not "my brother," "your son." He's already disowning the relationship. And the father says, gently, firmly, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate, because this your brother was dead and is alive." Your brother. The father corrects the disowning. He insists on the relationship, and he reframes the whole event. This isn't about fairness. This isn't about what anyone deserves. This is about someone who was lost and is found. Now, hold the prodigal son in your mind and listen to what else Jesus said about forgiveness. Peter, his closest disciple, comes to him and asks what seems like a reasonable question. "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Matthew 18:21. 7 was generous. Rabbinic tradition at the time suggested 3. Jesus says, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Some translations say 77. The Greek is deliberately ambiguous, but the point is the same. If you're still counting, you haven't understood forgiveness. The number is meant to break the calculator, to take the question, "how many times?" and render it meaningless. And then, as if the number weren't enough, Jesus tells a story. A king settles accounts with his servants. One servant owes 10,000 talents, Matthew 18:23-35. Now, 10,000 talents was not a real debt. It was a joke, an absurdity. 10,000 was the largest number in Greek. A talent was the largest unit of currency. This is like saying someone owes $100 trillion. It cannot be repaid, not in one lifetime, not in 1,000. The king forgives it, all of it, wipes it clean. That same servant walks out and finds a fellow servant who owes him 100 denarii, 100 days' wages. Real money, but manageable. And he grabs him by the throat, demands payment, throws him in prison. The ratio is 600,000 to 1. That's not an exaggeration. That's the actual math. Jesus built the math deliberately. Whatever anyone has done to you, 100 denarii. What you've been forgiven, 10,000 talents. The gap is so vast that unforgiveness becomes, in Jesus' framing, not just wrong, but logically absurd. And then there's the moment that stands above all the others, the crucifixion. Jesus is being executed, nailed to wood, hanging in the sun, suffocating slowly. And in the middle of it, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23:34. Not after, during. He didn't forgive once the pain was over and he could reflect with distance. He forgave while it was happening, toward people who hadn't asked, who didn't understand, who were, at that very moment, casting lots for his clothing. And the reason he offered wasn't that they deserved it. It was that they didn't understand. They know not what they do. Ignorance, not worthiness, was the basis. Paul, writing to the early churches, made the logic explicit. Forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you, Ephesians 4:32. The word he used, charizomai, comes from charis, grace, not a debt settled, a gift given, lavish, unearned, almost reckless in its generosity. The architecture is vertical, then horizontal. God forgives you, that's the vertical. And from that experience, from actually receiving something you didn't deserve, you find the capacity to extend it outward. You forgive not because you're strong enough. You forgive because you've been broken open by the experience of being forgiven yourself. C.S. Lewis, who understood this architecture better than almost anyone in the 20th century, wrote, "Everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive." He knew it was hard. He acknowledged that resentment can come roaring back as if nothing had been done. His word for it, the same word the tradition uses, was practice, not a moment, a choice made again and again. 70 times 7, not 490 people. One person, 490 times. And Lewis added something important. Forgiveness does not mean you trust them again. It does not mean you open the door. It means, and only means, that you make every effort to kill every taste of resentment in your own heart. What you do with the relationship after that is a separate question. This is Christianity on forgiveness, at its deepest. Not the greeting card, not the cliché, the real thing. A father running toward a son who wished him dead. A debt ratio of 600,000 to 1. A man dying on a cross, forgiving the people who put him there. And underneath it all, a single claim. You have been forgiven something so vast, so undeserved, so beyond anything you could repay, that withholding forgiveness from another person is not just cruel, it's incoherent. That's the first door. Now, before we open the second, there's something I need to tell you. The most famous quote about forgiveness attributed to the Buddha, the one you've almost certainly heard, is not his. Act 3. Buddha on forgiveness. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. You've heard this. You've probably seen it on a poster, a meme, a therapist's wall, attributed to the Buddha, sometimes to Nelson Mandela, sometimes to St. Augustine. It's not from any of them. The quote traces back to Western self-help literature, most likely Emmett Fox in the 1930s, then absorbed into 12-step recovery programs in the decades after. It's a good line. It's just not Buddhist. I tell you this not to be pedantic. I tell you because what the Buddha actually said about anger is far more precise, far more useful, and far more interesting than a metaphor about poison. He did use the word poison, but not the way you think. In the Gatva Sutta, SN 1.71, the Buddha described anger as having a honeyed crest and a poison root. Stop there. That image is worth sitting with. Anger has a honeyed crest. The top, the part you taste first, is sweet. The satisfaction of being right. The warmth of righteous indignation. The feeling that you are the wronged party, that justice is on your side, that your grievance is legitimate. That part, if you're honest, feels good. There's a reason people hold on to resentment for decades. It's not because they enjoy suffering. It's because the top layer tastes like honey. But underneath, the root is poison. The Buddha didn't say anger is poison. He said anger has a poison root, hidden beneath something that feels like nourishment. And that distinction matters, because if anger were simply unpleasant, you'd drop it the way you drop a hot coal. The problem is that it isn't simply unpleasant. Part of it is delicious. That's why it's hard to release. You're not letting go of pain. You're letting go of something that, on the surface, feels like meaning. Now, what does the poison root actually do? This is where the Buddha stopped being a poet and became, essentially, a diagnostician. In the Kodhana Sutta, AN 7, 60, He enumerated 7 specific ways that anger harms the person who holds it, not the target, the holder. And he framed it with a devastating setup. These 7 things are exactly what your enemy would wish for you. Your enemy wishes you to be ugly. Anger does that. He is ugly nevertheless, all because he is overcome with anger. Your enemy wishes you to sleep badly. An angry person lies down in pain, wakes in pain. Your enemy wishes you to make terrible decisions. Even when he gains a profit, he thinks, "I've suffered a loss." Anger distorts perception. You can't see clearly when you're burning. Your enemy wishes you to lose your wealth. Anger leads to reckless action, fines, consequences, financial ruin through poor judgment. Your enemy wishes you to lose your reputation. Done. The bad repute of an angry person spreads far and wide. Your enemy wishes you to lose your friends. His friends, companions, and relatives will avoid him from afar. Your enemy wishes you a bad destination after death. The Buddha added that too, but even if you set aside the cosmological claim, the first 6 are enough. They're observable, measurable, happening in real time. The Buddha wasn't moralizing. He wasn't saying anger is wrong. He was saying anger is a process, with a cause, a mechanism, and a predictable set of consequences. And the consequences fall on the angry person, every time, without exception. This is the Buddhist case for releasing resentment. And notice, it has nothing to do with the person who harmed you. Nothing to do with whether they deserve forgiveness. Nothing to do with God, or grace, or love. It's pure mechanism. You release resentment because of what resentment does to you. But the Buddha went further. He didn't just describe the damage. He showed how the damage is maintained, how we keep the wound open. The Dhammapada opens with one of the most precise psychological observations ever set to verse. He insulted me, hit me, beat me, robbed me. For those who brood on this, hostility isn't stilled. He insulted me, hit me, beat me, robbed me. For those who don't brood on this, hostility is stilled. DHP 3-4. The repetition is the point. The same 4 words, he insulted me, hit me, beat me, robbed me, repeated twice. Because that's exactly what resentment does. It replays. The same story, the same words, the same scene, over and over. 3 in the morning, in the shower, driving to work. The event happened once. The retelling happens 1,000 times. And each retelling reopens the wound as if it were fresh. The Buddha wasn't saying, "Don't notice that you've been harmed." He was saying, the replaying. That's where the real damage lives. The event is over. The story you keep telling yourself about the event, that's still happening, right now, inside you. And then, my favorite teaching on this subject, the Akosa Sutta, SN 7.2. A Brahmin approaches the Buddha and insults him, at length, publicly, in front of his students. The Buddha listens, and when the Brahmin finishes, the Buddha asks a question. If you prepared a meal for guests, and the guests refused it, to whom would the meal belong? The Brahmin answers, "It would belong to me." Even so, the Buddha says, "You have abused me, but I don't accept it, so it remains with you." The elegance of this response is breathtaking. No counterattack, no defense, no righteous speech about how the Brahmin should behave. Just, I don't accept it. The anger you brought, it's still yours, like a meal no one eats, like a gift no one opens. It sits with the one who carried it here. This isn't suppression. This isn't pretending it didn't happen. It's a very specific cognitive move. I see what you're offering. I choose not to take it. The transaction requires two participants, and I'm declining. Now, the Buddha set the bar high, higher than most people realize. In the Kakachupama Sutta, MN 21, he told his monks, "Even if bandits were to carve you up savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, he among you who let his heart get angered, even at that, would not be doing my bidding." This is not practical advice for daily life. The Buddha knew that. He chose the most extreme case imaginable and said, even then, goodwill is the right response. Why? Not because anger is morally wrong, but because of the logic we've already followed. If anger harms the angry, if resentment poisons the one who holds it, then the extreme case makes the principle undeniable. If even under the saw, anger serves no one, how much more clearly does that apply to the colleague who took credit for your work, the sibling who didn't call, the parent who said the wrong thing at Thanksgiving 23 years ago? The extreme case isn't the instruction, it's the proof. So how do you actually do this? The Buddhist answer begins, and this surprises people, with yourself. The Metta Sutta, SN 1.8, describes the practice of loving kindness. And the first instruction is not love your enemy. It's, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. Not selfishness, strategy. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot extend goodwill to someone who harmed you if you have no goodwill available. The practice builds the resource before asking you to spend it. And then it expands from yourself to people you love, to people you feel neutral about, and finally, only finally, to people who have harmed you. The progression is deliberate. It's scaffolding. You don't start with the hardest case. You train on the easy cases first. And by the time you reach the difficult person, you've built a capacity that didn't exist before. Underneath metta sits upekkha, equanimity. And equanimity is not the Buddhist version of I don't care. It's the capacity to care about someone's well-being without needing them to change, to apologize, or to even acknowledge what happened. You can hold compassion for someone and not require resolution. This is forgiveness without the need for closure, which for many of you is the only kind that will ever be available. Because the person is gone, or the person doesn't think they did anything wrong, or the person is dead. The Buddhist framework gives you permission for that. Thanissaro Bhikkhu draws a sharp distinction. Kama, forgiveness, is something you can do alone, totally on your own without the other person knowing. But Padasaranya Kama, reconciliation, requires two people, trust rebuilt over time, both parties participating. You can forgive without reconciling. You can release resentment without reopening the door. And here, very briefly, modern research has caught up. Researchers at Stanford found that a 6-session forgiveness training significantly reduced perceived stress and trait anger, and the benefits persisted 4 months later. Physiological studies show that when people mentally rehearse a grudge, their heart rate rises, blood pressure rises, stress hormones spike, and the effects linger even after the imagery stops. Each retelling of the grievance story triggers the same cortisol cascade. The body doesn't distinguish between the event and the memory of the event. What the Buddha observed 2,500 years ago in the Kodana Sutta, the 7 ways anger harms the holder, modern psychology has now measured in cortisol and cardiovascular data. He didn't have the instruments, he had the insight. This is Buddhism on forgiveness, at its most precise. Not a command to forgive, a map of what happens when you don't. Not grace from above, clear seeing from within. Not forgive because God forgave you. Forgive because you've looked closely enough at resentment to see what it's doing underneath the honey, at the root. That's the second door. Now, let's see what happens when you open them both at the same time. ACT 4, the dialogue. Here's what surprised me most when I put these two traditions side by side. They agree on far more than they should. Two teachers. Different centuries, different continents, different cosmologies. One believed in a personal God who forgives from above. The other taught a path with no God at the center. And yet, when they looked at the human being who cannot forgive, they saw the same thing. Both said, unforgiveness destroys the one who holds it. Jesus told a story about a servant who was forgiven everything and then choked a man over pocket change. And the point wasn't theological, it was psychological. The unforgiving servant couldn't see what he'd been given. His resentment made him blind. The Buddha listed 7 ways anger harms the angry: ugliness, sleeplessness, distorted judgment, loss of friends, loss of reputation, AN 7.60. And the point wasn't moral, it was diagnostic. Resentment is a disease with predictable symptoms. Different language, same observation. The grudge eats the vessel it's stored in. Both said, forgiveness is something that happens inside you. It does not require the other person. Jesus forgave from the cross, Luke 23:34. No one asked him to. No one understood what he was doing. He forgave into silence. The Buddha said you can release resentment totally on your own, without the other person having to know or understand what you've done. Both gave you permission to forgive someone who will never apologize. Someone who doesn't think they did anything wrong. Someone who is no longer alive. Both said, forgiveness is not reconciliation. This distinction matters more than almost anything else in this video. So, let me be clear. To forgive is to release the resentment inside you. To reconcile is to rebuild a relationship, and that requires both people. Trust rebuilt over time. Accountability, change. You can have the first without the second. You can let go of the anger and still not open the door. C.S. Lewis said it plainly. Forgiveness does not mean you must trust them again. The Buddhist tradition draws the same line. Kama is yours to give alone. Padasaranya kama, reconciliation, takes 2. If you are holding on to resentment because you think forgiving means letting someone back into your life, both traditions say, no, that's a different decision, and it's yours to make separately. And both said, forgiveness is practice, not event, not a moment of catharsis, not a single choice that fixes everything. Lewis wrote that he would think he'd forgiven someone, only to find the resentment blazing back, as if nothing had been done. The Buddhist metta practice is described as continuous, whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down. SN 1.8. Neither tradition sold the fantasy of one and done. Both knew that the human heart returns to its grooves, and both said, return to the practice, again and again, 70 times 7. So where do they diverge? At the deepest level, in the why. Jesus said, forgive because you have been forgiven. The experience of receiving grace, undeserved, unearnable, lavish, becomes the engine of forgiving others. Paul's word for it was charizomai, from charis, grace. You don't generate forgiveness from willpower. You let it overflow from having been broken open by something you didn't deserve. The vertical enables the horizontal. God forgives you, and from that encounter, you find you can forgive them. The emotional register of Christian forgiveness is gratitude. You forgive from fullness, from the overwhelming experience of having been the prodigal son and finding the Father running toward you anyway. The Buddha said, "Forgive because you see clearly what resentment does. No God required, no external grace. Just look at what anger does to your sleep, your judgment, your face, your friendships. Look at the honeyed crest and the poison root, SN 1.71. Look at the story you keep retelling. He insulted me, hit me, beat me, robbed me, DHP 3 to 4. And notice that the story is the wound now. The event is over. The narrative is what remains. The emotional register of Buddhist forgiveness is equanimity. You forgive from clarity, from the calm that comes when you've seen the mechanism clearly enough to step out of it. Love or wisdom, gratitude or clear seeing. And here is what each tradition offers that the other doesn't. Christianity offers grace. The 600,000 to 1 ratio, Matthew 18:23 to 35. The Father running before the apology is finished, Luke 15:20. The idea that forgiveness isn't something you achieve through effort. It's something that hits you, overwhelms you, breaks you open. Charizomai, reckless, lavish, disproportionate generosity that shatters the logic of debt. If you have ever been forgiven something you knew you didn't deserve, you know this feeling, and you know it changes what you're capable of giving. Buddhism offers mechanism, the granular, step-by-step map of how resentment operates inside you and how to dismantle it. The Pali language has 4 different words for what English calls anger: koda, the hot flash; aghata, the settled grudge; Vyapada, chronic ill will; Vira, the deep desire for vengeance. Each one a different process, each one requiring a different response. The Brahmavihara system, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, isn't a feeling you're supposed to summon. It's a training sequence. You build the muscle before you need it. Christianity says you should forgive, and gives you the most powerful reason in human history to want to. Buddhism says, here is how, and walks you through it, step by step, starting with the easiest case and working toward the hardest. There's one more thing the Buddha said, and it brings the 2 traditions closer together than you might expect. In the Vipacciti Sutta, SN 11.4, not returning anger for anger, one wins a double victory. He is healing both, himself and the other person. A double victory. Both. Not just the release of your own resentment, though that alone would be enough, but something else. When you break the cycle of retaliation, when you refuse to return anger for anger, you give the other person somewhere to go, a way out, a door they didn't have before. The cycle was locked. You unlocked it, not for their sake, not only for their sake, but because breaking cycles heals in both directions. Jesus would have recognized this. The Father running toward the prodigal, that's a door flung open, an exit from shame, a way back. Not because the Son earned it, because the Father chose to create it. So, let me bring this home, to you, to whoever is in your mind right now, the name that appeared at the beginning. You may need Jesus' reason to begin forgiving. The warmth of grace, the call of love, the sense that you yourself have been forgiven something 600,000 times larger than what you're being asked to forgive. The Father who runs, the debt wiped clean. That feeling, if you've known it, is the most powerful starting engine for forgiveness that exists. And you may need the Buddha's understanding of mechanism to sustain it. the clear seeing of what resentment does inside you, in your sleep, in your body, in your judgment, in the friends who quietly drift away. The 7 harms, AN 7.60. The honeyed crest you mistake for meaning, SN 1.71. The story you keep retelling at 2 in the morning, DHP 3 to 4. The meal no one accepts, sitting with the one who brought it, SN 7.2. Grace to begin. Mechanism to continue. Love to open the heart. Wisdom to keep it open. They are not competing. They are completing. And somewhere between Jerusalem and the Ganges, between a cross and a Bodhi tree, between a father running and a mind like the earth, there is a place where these 2 rivers meet. That place is you, holding the name you're holding right now, deciding what to do next.